Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 9. We're almost at 10 of Godless Moms podcast. And before we get started today, I just wanted to mention that we do have an audio-only version of this, and you can check that out in the link down below. If you go to the godlessmom.com/podcast, you're going to have buttons to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, all those fun podcast places. And also in the description, you're going to find a link to the Conference on Religious Trauma,
Yay!
which is coming up very, very soon. And that was a long time coming and a lot of hard work. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears have gone into this. But it's finally happening. So go and register. There's a ton of amazing speakers who are going to be there. There's going to be Marlene Winnell. There's going to be Nate Phelps, Dave Warnock, Mandisa Thomas, Yasmin Mohammed. All kinds of different amazing speakers are going to be talking on the topic of religious trauma syndrome. And the idea is to teach mental health professionals how to treat and be a really good supportive resource for people who are suffering from religious trauma syndrome. So
right, and also
go and register.
Yes, and we want to also encourage folks who are recovering from religious trauma to let them know that there is hope for recovery. It is possible. It'll be a great way for them to connect with others like me.
Yep. Yeah, it was supposed to be in person, which was going to be fun. That was going to be fun. But, it had to be virtual for now. But next year it'll be in person, right?
I sure hope so. I know this time's going to be it's going to be great because it's such an interesting event. It's different than any other event that's been hosted before, and it's long overdue. It's time to address the topic of religious trauma and call it what it is.
Agreed. I think that it's an amazing conference, and through thick and thin, I have supported this thing, so I can't wait to see it go live. Also, in the description, you'll find a link to International Association of Atheists membership, and that helps us to save the lives or assist atheists who are in danger in parts of the world where atheism is punishable by death, violence, prison time, all kinds of things like that. And we've only been doing this for about a year now, and we've had 40 cases in a year, and we've done some pretty amazing things. We've also sadly lost contact with some of our cases, and it's not an easy thing to deal with. So if you go down to that link to internationalatheists.org/membership and grab your membership, then your membership dues help us to help those people. And
I'm a proud member. I'd like to say I'm a proud member.
Yes, thank you, Janice. And also with membership, you get some cool swag. You get pins and stickers, and you get a little membership card, and so it's fun.
Very cool.
But this is my lovely co-host, Janice Selby of the Divorcing Religion Workshop and founder of the Conference on Religious Trauma. And Mpagi, who is somebody that is in our community, and I've known him for quite some time, just asked, what do you mean when you say religious trauma?
I'm glad you asked that. In the context of the Conference on Religious Trauma, we are looking at trauma that it's not just, say, an abusive action that was committed against one member in the name of religion, but it actually is more looking at the system of religion as being traumatizing. So for myself, I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian home. And so I suffered as a result in some ways of being in that. There were many things I wasn't allowed to do. There were many things I was taught that were harmful. And then when I left that religion, I suffered again. because I lost my community. I was far behind my peers developmentally in different areas because there's such a heavy emphasis on purity and separation. So it's really a double whammy for people who have spent time in religion and then leave. And that's where the phrase religious trauma syndrome comes in. And Dr. Marlene Winnell is pioneer in the field of religious trauma, and she's the one that came up with that phrase, religious trauma syndrome. So I encourage you to look up Dr. Winnell and find out some more about religious trauma syndrome.
Mm-hmm. And it's surprisingly common, especially in our little community. It's something that comes up pretty much every day in conversations that I have with atheists. So it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, I think. So good for you for starting the conference.
Thank you. And it's really can be a tricky topic to discuss because, of course, people who are religious, they a lot of them, they very much enjoy being religious. They feel that their faith adds a very important dimension to their life. They love their community. They don't see that there is any harm being perpetrated. They don't see anything wrong with teaching children that they will go to hell if they're disobedient. They don't see anything wrong with insisting that children obey their parents when, unfortunately, a lot of times those parents are dangerous and they don't deserve respect. So there are some things inherent in certainly the Abrahamic religions that are very harmful indeed.
Yeah, I can see that from the outside for sure. It's definitely obvious. I think it's more obvious when you're on the outside.
Oh, absolutely.
So today's topic is actually not religious trauma syndrome, but we should have an episode closer to the conference that's totally devoted to that. Today we were going to talk about raising our kids without hate. And the reason why we wanted to talk about this week is because of the conversation that has come up revolving around anti-Asian hatred and the crimes that have been committed recently along those lines. And Janice and I live in BC, which has a massive Asian population, especially in the Lower Mainland. And I know you lived in the Lower Mainland. I grew up in Richmond, BC, which is, if you go there right now, you will feel like you are in an Asian city. And for me, I always loved that so much. So my parents took me traveling around Asia when I was younger. And so seeing that happen in my hometown, like it turns into an Asian city all around me. It was like traveling without leaving home, I loved it. And that is the number one thing that I miss about living there. And you experienced living in the Lower Mainland.
Yes, and it was different for me because I grew up in the current town I live in the BC interior, which is very WASPy. So if you don't know what that means, it stands for White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and not a very diverse town at all. And I think in my class when I was growing up, I think I had one girl whose parents were of Chinese descent, one of Japanese descent, and there were a couple of brothers in the school who were from another country, and they were Black, and a teacher had adopted them. And so knowing those few people who looked differently than me, and of course I had an adopted sister who's First Nations, but so I thought that I was pretty well-rounded. And then I moved to Vancouver in my very early 20s, and I lived in the East End of Vancouver, and it was such a shock, a tremendous shock to my system to go out and wait for my bus every day and not hear English being spoken, and to be sometimes the only Caucasian person on the bus. And it was so jarring to me because I was forced to confront my innate racism that I didn't even know existed. It never crossed my mind that that racism or race would be an issue for me at all. And it really took me going to live in such a diverse city as Vancouver to deal with some of those things. It was eye-opening.
Yeah, I can see that being totally eye-opening. We had when we like I grew up where I grew up, it was a small rural very white town. And then as I grew and at sometime in my teenage years, the Asian population overtook the Caucasian population. And now I believe the Asian population is somewhere around 70% of the population in Richmond, BC. And like when you're there, it's like all the signs are in another language, mostly Chinese. And there's just, I mean, I love it. This is the number one, the only reason why I miss Richmond. But it was for me because I was raised by my hippie parents, peace, love, and understanding, you know, and they took us traveling all over the world. That for me, I liked it. And I was happy to have Asian friends and try to, you know, learn about their culture and stuff like that. But being a white person in a town that used to be predominantly white, that has now become predominantly Asian, all the white people around you assume. They assume that if they're with you in a closed room, that they can just spew their disgusting hatred. And they still do this. They, in almost every situation where I'm alone with white people, there are white people who spew hatred about some other race, and it just used to drive me crazy, and I cut ties with so many people because of it. I remember having arguments. One of the things that, I don't know if you ever experienced this living where you did in the Lower Mainland, but in Richmond we had those malls that would pop up, and we called them the Asian malls because they were Asian owned. All the shops inside were like Asian products and Asian food and Asian medicine and all of this stuff. And so we called them the Asian malls, and there was like Yauhan Center, there was Parker Place, there was Aberdeen Mall. These were all Asian malls. And then we had our white people mall, which was called Richmond Center, which had like Tommy Hilfiger and all that stuff in it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the white people would go to Richmond Center and the Asian people would all go to their Asian malls. And if you ever went into the Asian mall, sometimes you would get funny looks, right? If you're white, as white as I am, they give you funny looks, and you could tell that they were a little bit standoffish. And my friends, I use that loosely because they're not anymore, would always complain about this and be like, oh, they're so rude. I could never shop at that mall because they're so rude and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, do you know what it's like to pack up your entire life, move to an entirely different country where nobody looks like you, nobody speaks your language, and when you arrive, you're not treated very nicely, and continually every single day you face that just based on the way you look and sound, you are not treated very nicely. Eventually, you're going to start to put up a wall. You're going to start to have defenses around you. And I used to have this argument constantly with white people in my life. At some point, like, they come to Canada and they're treated like shit, and then eventually they're in a situation where they're in their mall and you come in and they're rude to you. So eventually, somewhere in that cycle, someone's got to stop. Like, someone's got to put a stop to it, right? And that's what I always argued with my friends, is like, I'm where that stops. I don't care if they don't smile at me. I will smile at them. I you know, and I just would argue about that all the time. And I think living in Australia helped me a little tiny minuscule bit understand what they go through, because I was treated differently because of the way that I sounded, obviously not the way that I looked. But yeah, I just remember it was, I don't know, have you experienced that where you're in a room full of white people and they just assume that you're okay with hearing that crap?
Yes. For me, where it was a tender spot usually would be people who would speak disparagingly about First Nations. That's our Indigenous Aboriginal peoples in Canada. at least in this part of Canada. And my sister came to live with us when I was 4 years old, and she was a product of the 60s scoop, which is a very devastating thing that the Canadian government did. They went on to the reserves, and they literally took children away from the families and placed them in homes largely of white evangelical Christians, which my parents were. And then the government, of course, paid those families to raise those children. And I, as a child, I knew nothing about that. The story that I was told was that my sister was living in an unsafe situation with her birth family, and so she needed a safe place, and so she came and stayed with us. And I never questioned it. I never questioned it at all until I was like 40. And then I started educating myself about the 60s scoop and what the government had done, and what, all the evils perpetrated against our First Nations people with residential schooling and all that horrifying stuff. But I can definitely recall growing up and being really upset when people would say unkind things and untrue things about my sister or about her heritage. So yeah, it's all around us, unfortunately. And I mean, the event that took place in the United States recently with the fellow who murdered the women of Asian heritage is so shocking. And yet, when we look at what their president did, over the last 4 years he was in office, and really fomenting hatred against Asian folks in particular related to the virus. It's, of course, it just stirs everybody up, stirs up all those feelings, and feelings eat facts for breakfast. Humans are very feeling animals. We really have to work hard to instead make sure we are factually based and responding and acting on fact rather than simply going on our feelings. Because it's easier just to go on our feelings. It takes work to educate ourselves. And so this person goes out, commits those terrible murders. And then also, it turns out, though, it's not just racism that was at play, and misogyny, of course, because they were women, but purity culture also plays a huge role, unfortunately, in what this man did, because he was raised in a very religious home, very Christian home. I think his father maybe is a pastor. And so purity culture definitely comes into play there, where Christian kids growing up in homes where purity is demanded, they are taught that even their most basic sexual impulses that are sinful. To masturbate or even be thinking sexual thoughts is a sinful, awful thing to do. And of course, sinning can take you to hell. So then you're also terrified you're going to end up being tortured forever in a lake of fire and separated from everyone you love, because you masturbate or because you have sex with someone or want to have sex with someone. It's very twisted. It's very insidious. And when you're raised that way, it's a real challenge to overcome it. And obviously, he was not able to, because he used sex addiction, I think, as an excuse. And I do want to say something about that. There are lots of therapists who don't actually even believe sex addiction is a real thing. What we do see a lot of is people who come from religious backgrounds, or maybe their partner comes from religious background, and they are so uncomfortable with sex that if the partner enjoys porn or watches porn or wants to try even just something slightly different sexually, they label that partner because they're so uncomfortable. You have a sex addiction problem. You have a porn addiction problem. I want you to go get help immediately. And so then, even just for a basic normal sex drive, they're told that there's something wrong with them. And it's often not true.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is constantly coming up with the conversations that I have with atheists, is their immense guilt and that they still have, despite the fact that they've left their religion, they no longer believe in hell, they no longer believe in the God who's judging them or watching them. They still struggle with the immense guilt tied to their sexual desires, and it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking because honestly, I didn't really know that people suffered in that way until just a few years ago, really. And like you know how my parents raised me. My parents always raised me with open conversation, and often it was quite uncomfortable.
More open than you care to be.
Yeah. Like I remember I used to get really, really, really bad menstrual cramps. And like I would faint sometimes in the shower from it, or in the bathroom from it. And and I would like just be in bed and I'd be groaning. And I remember that my parents basically told me, that one of the ways that you get rid of menstrual cramps is by masturbating. My parents are like basically telling me
Same
to
with headaches.
masturbate.
Yeah,
So
get out
I'm
that
like from the
headache.
totally opposite end of the spectrum, but it's it's really sad. It hurts me to think about people being shamed for these things. It's natural to be like, we're sexual creatures. We have sex drives and we have
That's one of the best
desires, and
being
it,
human.
yeah, and you know what breaks my heart even more about it is the fact that you only have the one life to do all of these things in. And if you spend it worrying about what some mythical god is thinking of what you're doing, you miss out on that. You don't get another chance to do it,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
I do. One of our viewers makes a good point, talking about, it wasn't all female victims that happened in the States recently. There was, I believe, a gentleman uh, in there as well. And anyone who, obviously, anyone who's murdered or affected by murder in their family or their loved ones, um, is a victim. Right now, we're looking at this specific event that happened, and it does appear that racism, it was likely a contributing factor, as well as religion and sex.
Yeah, he also asked in an earlier comment. This was Mpagi again.
Mhm.
Mpagi, I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I've never known how to pronounce it. I probably should have asked you sooner because we've had lots of conversations. He's a great guy. Um, but he asked, why is it being referred to as like an Asian hate crime when there were other victims? And the way that at least the way that I see it is that this the perpetrator of this crime was going to these salons for his because of his sexual desires and all of that stuff. And in Western culture, we have fetishized Asian women.
Mhm.
And when you think of a massage parlor or something of that nature, you think automatically of Asian women. And it's all tied in together. Like, it's all tied in together, where this way that we've fetishized Asian women, and he obviously had a desire for them, and so it's mixed up racism and misogyny, and then of course his guilt from purity culture. It's all tied in together. I don't think that you can rule out any one thing, and I don't think that you can blame only one thing. I think that it's a mix of a whole bunch of toxic crap going on in this guy. But the racism is definitely there. I don't think that it can be denied.
And we see, unfortunately, heightened levels of antagonism towards Asian folks or people of Asian heritage in particular right now in Canada and the United States. I don't know about other places, but directly related to things that have been said about the coronavirus, you know, those things that have been said about it. And it's people are I mean, people in our communities being spat upon or threatened or pushed, or just because they look like they're from Asian heritage. It's really breathtaking to me. I
It's
hope that our viewers are the type of people that would step in if they saw something going on.
growing up in Richmond with so many Asian people around me. It's this isn't new. This has been going on for so long, and I remember seeing so many people, and I'm sure that my husband could chime in on this because he grew up in Richmond too. You just the hatred is there. I remember one night going out for we'd been drinking and we went to this all you can eat sushi place in the middle of the night, and one of my friends sitting right there at the table started calling them the C word, and not the CUNT
Right,
word, but
right,
the
yeah,
other
I
C
know.
word.
Yeah.
And then eventually, like, I mean, he was really drunk, but it's no excuse. And it's just it would there were so many situations like that. I was in it would be every weekend I would find myself in a situation where I was with a group of white people because I could never work my way into a group of Asian people, although I wish I could have. Um, but I was always with a group of white people, and somebody eventually would say something or do something that horrified me.
Mhm.
And of course, I would always cut ties with people like that, and people were always judging me for that. They're always saying, "Oh, you're so uppity and blah 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 blah." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm sorry. Like I've traveled around Asia. I was welcomed there. I was happily welcomed there everywhere I went. I had like maybe 3 bad experiences
Mhm.
in Asia. That's about
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
And I'm not gonna. I just there's no reason to put up with that shit, and I don't think that anybody should put up with that shit. And I think if it's your friends who are doing that, you still shouldn't put up with that shit. I don't think that you should ever put up with it. If you don't like hearing that, and you want to be a part of the solution here, don't put up with that. Don't If your friends won't change, if your friends won't hear you, ditch them. I don't
Mhm.
have any friends except for you and my husband. So, but that's why everybody's racist.
This actually does make a nice segue into the parenting portion of our podcast, as far as ways that we can try and help our children grow to be people who don't hate. And you touched on one of the ways just a moment ago. If we see something, say something, and it can be an uncomfortable conversation because anything, whether it's politics, religion, race, sexuality, these are things that we might not really feel comfortable talking with our children about, or people close to us, but we absolutely must talk about these things. There has to be a dialogue. And so if we're out somewhere and we're at the playground and we hear someone use a word that's disparaging to someone else, um, that's a good opportunity to talk to our kids about it. If not right there, then when you get home, hey, did you hear a word that made you uncomfortable? Or did you wonder, or did you know what it meant when so and so said this thing? And let's talk about it. And how do you think the other person felt? And why do you think the person said that? Um, and what do you think about that? And really try and engage in dialogue with our children, as well as making sure that when we have opportunities, particularly when the kids are little, that we are exposing them to lots of diversity in all sorts of ways, in the food that we enjoy, in things that different cultures celebrate, have different traditions. Um, it's really important to try and expose kids to that. I wasn't exposed to many things at all that way when I
Mhm.
was growing up, and I think we do our kids a disservice if we don't expose them to those things.
Yeah, I think that with kids, you have to set an example. You have to have zero tolerance around them and then make sure that they see it. Because like I said, it happens, especially here. Like it happened a lot living in Richmond, but people eventually, got the idea that I wasn't cool with that and they
Mhm.
stopped. But then you move here and there's a lot of rig pigs from Alberta and, like just people who have never seen another culture in their lives and just grown up in small white towns and you go and you'll like have a barbecue with them or something like that and they'll start complaining about something. Like I remember once we were at some kind of bonfire at the beach or something like that, and someone started talking about how the Muslims were taking over. I'm like, like
Mm.
where? Where are
Mm.
they? There's none in Summerland. But it was just it's just ridiculous. But the way that we would deal with it is we just wouldn't hang out with those people anymore. And my son always saw that. He saw that and he heard like we would talk to him about it. We would talk about it in front of him saying, "I don't want to be around that. I don't want to put up with that. I don't want my son hearing that. You know, I don't put up with it. I simply do not put up with it." And I mean, luckily Summerland is really like majority not like that. Like most people in Summerland are transplants from bigger cities
Mhm.
and or they're retired. And
Would you explain
so
the term rig pig?
oh yeah, that's people who work on the oil rigs in Alberta.
So we might actually prefer to call them workers from the tar sands or oil
Yeah.
workers
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
They,
just leading by example, yeah.
yeah, you lead by example, and we would always have conversations with our youngest about this stuff, and we would explain to him that like people may look different and people may sound different, but they're human beings and they need to be treated exactly the same and celebrate their differences. And I don't know if I ever told you the story, but when we moved here, we put him in a private school, Montessori school,
Mhm.
and when we pulled him out, it was because there was a British man who was working there who was really rude with kids. And he would swear in front of them. And when they were like walking on field trips, like they would walk because it's Summerland, you can walk everywhere.
Yeah.
Walk on field trips. And he would, if a car was going too fast, he would like flip the bird at them in front of the kids and stuff like that. That stuff doesn't bother me. Like there are bigger things to get upset about, but it bothered a lot of other people. And a lot of other people, a lot of the other parents they would complain about this man. And so the school's response was to get an assembly together of all the students and sit them down and tell them that they needed to change their expectations of this man because he was British and that's what British people are like.
Oh,
I know. And my son came home and he was 8, 7 or 8 at the time. He came home from school that day and he told me that. And I'm like, he's got to be getting something wrong about this, right? Like he's got to be mixed up about something.
yeah.
And so I decided I was going to go down to the school. And I went down to the school and I went to the teacher and I was almost embarrassed bringing this up with her because I was sure that my son had gotten something wrong, right? Because
Mm.
there's no way that the school did this. And so I was kind of laughing when I brought it up with her. I was like, so, this might sound silly, but my son said that you guys said that British people are just innately rude and he just needs to deal with it. And I was like, can you tell me what really happened? And she's like, no, that's what we said. And I was like, you should see
Oops.
my face went, it just switched to anger.
Mm.
I was like, what? What? Like
Mm.
you're teaching my child to to assume that all British people are rude. And so that's when we decided that that was his last year at that school. And but he wrote out the rest of the school year. But it was funny because later on in the year, he said the word testicles in school, and he got a disciplinary sheet sent home because he said the word testicles.
He should have got extra points for being able to know a word so big when he was such a little kid.
Right? And so they sent home this disciplinary sheet, and I'm supposed to sign it. And, basically they assume that I talked to him about it. But instead, I sent back a note that said that they needn't worry about the language that Joey uses at school because he comes from a predominantly British background. And then I signed it, cheerio.
Oh my God. Oh boy, you're such a cool mom. That's so funny.
I'm a little bit of an outcast here.
My favorite outcast. I want to address a comment that Peter made. Racism is learned and not innate, is his comment. And I will say racism is taught and learned, but fear is innate. And part of our evolutionary development involves us on some level feeling fear or discomfort when someone that, evolutionary to us would have been an outsider or someone that looked different or was different. So, nowadays that does not really stand us in very good stead. We're in the world is just such a beautiful mosaic. There's so many different people from so many different places. But that fear can still come up, like I was talking about when I first was living in Vancouver. So there was a real discomfort of being in such a different environment, in a situation I had never been in before, and it was off-putting to me. Sometimes I felt a little bit angry about it, or even just confused about why am I struggling with this so much? This is still Canada. This is still the country I grew up in. So I think it's so helpful and so important for us to be discussing these issues with our kids as they are growing up, as things come up. Watch the news with your kids, or discuss, obviously at age appropriate levels, but everything that's been going on in Myanmar, and with the military, the coup that's gone on there, and trying to trample on democracy. And certainly this is in the United States right now too, with different states trying to say that abortion is no longer legal. And this is trampling on the rights of women to control their own bodies. And things won't stop unless we talk about them, unless we address them. So I think it is important for us to talk about these things.
And along the lines of fear being innate, it's like the number one way, you as a therapist probably know this well, but the number one way to get over a fear or a phobia of some kind is exposure. And that's that's what my parents did with me. Obviously, not everybody can afford to go traveling around the world and exploring all these other cultures, but you can certainly expose your kids to different cultures at home, different cuisines and books and literature and movies and stuff like that. You don't have to just stick to things that are put out by people that look like you, and that's a perfect in for opening that dialogue with your kids about, like, this culture is different, but it's not, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's worse, right? It's just a different culture. Lots of people live in different ways, and that's what we've tried to do with our kids. I wish that I could take them traveling more. I wish I could just, that's all. I wish that was all I did, because my parents gave me the travel bug, but it's expensive to travel. And of course, right now you can't at all, but there's just so many different ways to expose kids to different cultures. And that's something that I love about the internet, because there's like there's a huge interest in Japanese culture right now amongst younger people, and I just think it's awesome that they're being exposed to different cultures through the internet that maybe their parents didn't even intend for them to be exposed to, but it's like, haha, joke's on you.
When our children are younger as well, we can encourage them to be thinking about diversity in terms of, um, so looking at maybe they have 5 or 6 friends that they would consider part of their friend group, that they all go to birthday parties and this sort of thing. What's your favorite thing about this person? And what's your favorite thing about that person? And it didn't, whether they are coming from different racial backgrounds or not, just encouraging the idea that everybody has something valuable to contribute, and that diversity is a good thing, where our society is the richer for being a diverse society. And yeah, really just seizing on teachable moments, as one of our other viewers mentioned, so important. And they are there. We just have to be aware of them and not afraid to speak about them when they do come up.
Mm-hmm. I think that it helped when we lived in Richmond and when we lived in Surrey and all those different places, because they were very, very diverse. And you could, like, my son would go to daycare with kids that they all look different.
Yes.
And his best friend growing up, we moved here when he was 6, and prior to that, his next door neighbor best friend was a South Asian girl, and oh my god, they were so cute.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just exposure really helped. And now his favorite food is sushi and butter chicken. So we're ending the meat and potatoes cycle in our house.
I never even had butter chicken, or I never went to an East Indian restaurant, anything like that, really, until I left religion and was in my early 40s and really opened myself up to trying just all sorts of different things that it had just never been part of my life before. My view was so narrow, and my life was so narrow, and a lot of the way I lived as a fundamentalist was fear-based, and fear was always of the unknown, fear of the outside, fear of secular influences, evil secular influences creeping in, and the devil trying to harm my children, especially with secular humanist thinking. Oh my God. And now I'm like, yeah, I'm a secular humanist. But the fear factor is heavy with fundamentalists. So I like what you say about using exposure therapy to help us overcome those fears.
Yeah, because I think that people just generally fear things that they don't know. And so the idea is that you have to get them to know it. That it has to be normal to them. And like growing up in Richmond, it was normal to me to be surrounded by people of all different cultures. And my son now lives in Summerland, and Summerland is almost entirely white. So I have to do something else in order to ensure that he doesn't grow up feeling afraid when he's in a situation where things don't look the way they look in Summerland,
Mm-hmm.
And luckily he has no fear of anything. I'm pretty sure he's going to be flying off mountains at some point.
Yeah. Courtney, would you please address the comment that we have in the side there by Gregory?
Oh, not a fan of cultures that eat cats, bats, and rats. See, I don't like that comment because for so many reasons. First of all, that's a stereotype. The cultures that eat cats, bats, and rats are not necessarily cultures that eat cats, bats, and rats. There may be some people that eat animals that we don't eat here normally, but we don't seem to have a problem with when you go to Japan and they serve you eel, right? Like eel is not a common food on our plates here in Summerland or in the Okanagan, but people don't seem to have a problem when you have eel on the plate when you go to Japan. But if somebody in China eats a bat, for some reason that's considered bad. And I've never really understood this. Like, what's the difference between eating a cow and a bat? I because we all eat cow here. Well, not all of us, but a lot of us do.
But in India they wouldn't. So yeah,
Yeah.
my point is that we need to be careful with making comments like that, because that
Yeah.
actually certainly sounds like it's bordering on dangerous territory. If you
Yeah.
don't like eating those things, then you don't eat those things. But to condemn a culture, or say I don't like those cultures because they do that. Well, that's just the difference between that culture and the culture that you grew up in.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I am of the opinion that not all cultures are equal. That there are, like, for instance, some of the cultures where they don't accept the LGBTQ community.
Right.
I don't like that. I don't like
Yep.
that.
Mhm.
But
And that
but that
mhm.
that like, it's not dismissive of the entire culture, though. That's the thing, is that you have to understand that you can get rid of that and still have other parts of the culture,
Mm.
um, and hang on to those things. Like, for instance, I'm an atheist and I celebrate Christmas, right? So I have zero amount of the toxicity of Christianity in my life, but I still have little bits of Christianity in my life just because it's fun and happy and
Mhm.
joyful.
And this is the dominant culture that you did grow up in. And I'm largely pescatarian, so I really eat more of a plant-based diet with a little bit of fish thrown in. Um, but that certainly doesn't lead me to say that vegans are bad, or any or non-vegans, or people, just because people eat differently than I eat doesn't say necessarily anything about who they are as a person.
And well, not only that, when you're traveling these countries and you're traveling the developing world, and I mean, I know that China isn't the developing world, but it's, they're pretty developed.
Mm.
But there are many places in the world where you don't really have any choices. Like, if it's between eating and eating this, or not eating and eating this, then you choose eating this because you want to live. And sometimes it's just such a privileged thing to be able to judge what other people eat.
That is
Um,
actually very true. Yeah.
it drives me crazy. It absolutely drives me crazy. It's something that I've found from some vegans that I've known. No, Bobby, I'm not talking about you. That's my brother. He's always been very accepting of the fact that I'm not a vegan. But um but some vegans in my life have been very judgmental about the fact that I'm not a vegan.
Right.
But for me, in order for me to be a vegan, like, I'm feeding an entire family. First of all,
Mhm.
I'm feeding a family that loves meat. Um,
Mhm.
I don't seem to like meat as much as some of the other members of my family. Like, I
Mhm.
could get by with a majority vegetarian diet. But I'm feeding a family that loves meat, and so I need to find some way. If I'm going to make everything that we eat vegetarian or vegan, I need to be able to find some way to replace that for them. And that's a huge undertaking. Like,
Mhm.
just the research, just figuring out what to eat normally with
Yeah.
is a nightmare. It's a nightmare when you have picky kids and you have no time and you've got 17 different jobs, and, like, it's just a nightmare already. And now you're saying, okay, now we're going to take out 90% of the products that are in the grocery store. Good luck.
I
It's just,
it
it's so
it
privileged to be able to judge people like that.
it's privileged, but I think even more than that, so we can become extreme in our views about anything. Extremism, fundamentalism exists in every sphere. Um, Politics, religion, ecology, nutrition. And the problem comes when we allow that to determine whether or not we will be friends or be in a relationship with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
That's really when I ask my clients, do you hold your beliefs or do they hold you? And it's
Mm-hmm.
easy for us to kind of start out in the middle and then really drift to one side or the other. And our beliefs need to be able to be challenged continually
Yeah.
and to see if we are becoming extreme.
Yeah, or dogmatic. And I find that there are a lot of dogmatic atheists too, where in our community we have atheists who won't um, consider having religious people in their social circle. And I understand that there's a lot of atheists that have suffered from religious trauma syndrome, and that that's probably putting a big wall up for
Yeah.
them connecting with religious people. But you still, like, I've had very influential people in the community talk to me since I started my organization with Bridget. They've talked to us about the fact that they don't feel comfortable supporting our organization because we said that we would be friendly to religious people and we would have interfaith partners and stuff like that. Um, so there's a lot of very dogmatic atheists as well, and you need to just I don't know. I don't know. I just wish everybody could approach everything with a little bit of balance and be rational about it, and like you said earlier, not always, thinking with your emotions, but
Mhm.
weighing the facts, weighing reality.
Mhm. It's one thing to leave fundamentalist um, religion, but we can often take that spirit of fundamentalism, that mindset of fundamentalism with us. Even then, when we leave religion, we still can be dogmatic, rigid, authoritarian, black and white in our ways of thinking. And this is what needs to be addressed. And really, that comes with maturity and with
Mhm.
experience and being willing to examine why you feel so strongly about
Yeah.
a certain thing. And
Yeah, it's
that's not a
usually
small feat. That's not a small task. That's because that can cut to the core of your identity. If your identity has been defined as I am this, like for me, it was I
Mhm.
am an evangelical Christian homeschooling, right wing mama and wife. And then one by one, I lost all those things. And I wasn't married anymore. And I wasn't homeschooling anymore. And eventually, I wasn't even a Christian anymore. And what
Mhm.
was left of my identity? It was very raw.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, I can't even imagine. But I kind of like tiny sliver of what you're saying I can understand because I I was always a very emotional person. I wonder why. Raised by my therapist dad. But I was always a very emotional person, and I've had to learn to not operate solely on my emotions, especially being a mom and definitely in my relationship. Um I've had to learn to just, as they say, pick your battles and like chill out sometimes. I've had to learn that. And I think two of the things that helped me start to look at things with a more rational eye were, aside from my partner who helped me a great deal, but um were being a wrongful convictions activist.
Right.
When you're studying wrongful convictions and when you're reading about them, you start to realize just how often human beings are wrong despite the fact that they're sure. Um, and you start to understand how fallible the human mind is and how operating on emotion is not good for anybody. Pure emotion, I mean. Like, there needs to be a balance. There's a place for emotion. There's absolutely a place for emotion, but there needs to be a balance. if your emotions are making you ignore the facts, then you don't have that balance. And that's also being an anti-death penalty activist as well. Is it helped me to understand that the death penalty is largely based in emotion. It is a product of the need for revenge, vengeance, and that is it, because the data is there that says it doesn't work for any reason that people usually give.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that just talking with religious people on Twitter since doing all of this stuff, this Godless Mom thing, it's helped me to be a more, like, I weigh out what I say more, because they, like, some of those people who argue with you on Twitter will pick apart like just the tiniest little parts of what you're saying, and you have to be able to defend yourself. So those are the two things that have helped me kind of see things a little bit more rationally and have a little bit more balance with my highly emotional brain.
I know you'll be very surprised to learn that I also can frequently be quite emotional. And one thing that has helped me, and I wonder how this might have affected my parenting differently. On Facebook, I belong to some different Stoic groups about Stoics and Stoicism, and that is such a was such a foreign concept to me. So I did, when I was religious, I did understand that I was supposed to have some degree of self-control. Like
Yeah.
that was a fruit of the spirit. That's a fruit of the spirit from the New Testament, if you have self-control. Unfortunately, self-control is something that I've always struggled with, and I still continue to struggle with it to this day.
Me
Um,
too.
but the Stoicism groups have been helpful for me, and also my husband is my ex-husband, pardon me, quite is quite a Stoic kind of person, and my current partner also, I'd say, is very well balanced, let's say,
Calm.
emotionally, so that not prone to to outbursts. One of us is, but
It's the
but it's
same.
not.
It's the same in my relationship. My husband is like, I was telling you before we went live that we joke about, like, he'll just have a straight face on. He'll be like, "This is my surprised face. This is my happy." We all joke about it, right? Like, he just is so, he doesn't show his emotions very much.
Yeah.
I can always tell how he's feeling, right? Because I've gotten to know
Right.
him so well. Um, but yeah, he like I was, when we first got together, he was this non-emotional creature, and I was this like fireball. Just so
Yeah.
we've balanced each other out. I don't know, it just works.
Mhm. And I love the idea of teaching children emotions are natural and normal. We all have emotions. It's part of being human. And then also being able to teach them different ways that they can manage their emotions when their emotions are feeling really big and powerful, and teaching them about being rational and using
Mhm,
logic, and um, that nothing is wrong about them as a human. They're a
mhm,
wonderful human, and here are some ways that they can grow.
mhm. Poggy just said, racism is big business. Without it, most of the crimes the ruling class convinces people to commit against each other would not be possible, and people would start to realize who their true enemies are. I think that there's that's like, there's some truth in that,
Sounds like
you
religion.
know, yeah, it's, they basically, say they, it sounds like you're a conspiracy theorist, but you know what I mean? Like, it's the the ruling class, the big corporations, the people who are collecting your money every day, those people are definitely interested in you being preoccupied by other things.
Mhm,
Um, so I definitely agree with that.
mhm. Yep, just like, the aim of the advertiser is constantly to make us feel less than, like
Mhm.
we are until we buy their product. we're really not good enough. So just sowing seeds of discontent.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that that's true. And when you think about that, it ties into in the US, some of the voting issues, the fact that a lot of people don't make it out to vote because they're working their third job that day and they don't have enough money. And often that type of situation predominantly affects certain minority groups more often than others. And it's a form of racism for sure.
It's absolutely done on purpose. It's just despicable. I don't know the extent to which Canada falls into that pattern as well, but it's extremely obvious in the United States. And really, we need to evolve past this. We need to get past this somehow. And talking
We
about
do.
it like we're doing is a good starting place. Thanks to
I think,
everybody who even tuned in today and
yeah.
wanted to hear about this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a volatile topic, like there's so many people out there who deny the fact that systemic racism exists, which just blows my mind. But I honestly truly believe that those people don't understand what systemic racism is. I think that they believe that systemic racism means that all of the people in the system are individually carrying around conscious biases against certain races. But that's not necessarily what it means. What it means is that the system is set up in such a way that has come from history, has been built up from history, throughout history, and it exists in such a way that it's unfair to certain groups of people. And the stats alone prove that. You don't need to know the motive. The stats alone prove that the system is not balanced. So I don't know how you can deny systemic racism, even in Canada.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Gosh. Absolutely.
But anyways, yes, thank you to everybody who tuned in and was a reasonable human being in the comments. I appreciate that. And next week, we will join you again at noon on Saturdays. So make sure that you are subscribed to this channel on YouTube or you like the Facebook page, whichever you're watching it on. And you'll be notified when we go live and you can be in the chat again.
That's
And
right. And we want you to sign up for CORT, the Conference on
Yes.
Religious Trauma. The link is down below there in the description. And also, when you register for CORT, you can use the discount code POD15, POD15, all one word, to get your discount on your ticket at registration.
Yes. And you can also subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all those places. And please give us a rating and a review so that we get more eyes on the podcast, more downloads, because we just want to be able to reach more people. Because secular parenting rocks. Thanks for joining us.
This was
We'll
good.
talk to you next week. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.